Don't worry, this is just for the recording. Okay. So I'm just going to look like a div with a microphone. How's it going? This is not working through a PA. Basically, we're recording the event, so I'm going to look like a weirdo with a microphone in front of me that you can't even hear. This is great. Thanks all for coming tonight. Thanks to our hosts, Jigsaw 24, who we've got two of the members of Jigsaw behind you. So if you say thank you to Matt and Joffrey for very kindly letting us use here. And for supplying so much booze and food, which I'm very excited about. We've got Kate and Jeff from Boombox Post, who have very kindly offered to come over and speak to us about the work they do, their internship program, their use of social media, their basically all-around greatness in the industry as sound designers and just everything you do. So I'm not going to bore you with an intro because I'm shite at these, so I'm going to let them do it. You guys take it away.
So thank you guys for coming. Like she said, I'm Kate, this is Jeff. We own Boombox Post together. We're 50-50 owners of it. Let's see, what do we...
We both come from a music background originally. We went to school for music and technology, more or less. And
I played the clarinet and I majored in sound recording technology with a bachelor's of science and microelectronics. And Jeff is a percussionist, and he went to the University of Indiana.
Indiana School of Music, yep, with the outside field in telecom production, which is sort of a fake half-film major kind of thing. We both worked at a really small boutique house in Burbank, California for about 5 years. That company was bought by Warner Brothers, so we were supervising sound editors at Warner Sound for 5 years, and then we left to start Boombox Post, which is all about what we're talking about today.
Yeah, so we thought that we would kind of break the ice. We're pretty casual people. We're from Los Angeles. So we thought we'd break the ice and just ask a few of you guys what you do so we can get a feel for who's here and what your interests are before we get too far into things. Does anybody want to share their name and what they do? Anybody? We're going to choose someone.
Okay, great. Thank you.
John York, re-recording mixer, do supervising some projects, TV dramas and low budget film.
Excellent.
Cool. Thanks, John.
Thanh you.
You're on. Stop the ball rolling.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm a sound effects editor and Foley recordist. I work on a mixture of film, drama, and also animation.
Awesome.
Excellent. And do you work at a studio or are you freelance?
I'm freelance.
Okay. And what about you with the beard?
I'm a freelance sound editor. I do a mixture of short form animation and games mainly.
Oh, excellent. Cool. And do you do dialogue and sound effects and everything?
Yeah, a bit of a mixture of everything. Really.
One-stop shop?
Jack of all trades?
Yeah.
Is that an expression out here or just?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, great. Well, so we do, I don't know how familiar you guys are, but we do exclusively sound for animation. Almost all of it is television series. We do a little bit of non-theatrical features as well. That has been what we've done from the beginning of it. Jeff and I both started as sound effects editors, and we did that all the way through, we were at Warner Brothers, where we became supervising sound editors, and we started to oversee the whole post process. And then once we started our own company, we started doing all the other jobs too, because we started small and we scaled up. So we also are dialogue editors, and now we're also re-recording mixers for a number of our series too.
We work with pretty much every major animation studio. In Burbank, it's just this bullseye where we're kind of in the center of it, and all around us within probably 2 square miles, all of the studios are. So we're in a great little location for that. We work with Nickelodeon, Netflix, Amazon, Disney, DreamWorks, probably 3 or 4 more I can't remember, that are all the big studios. And we also work with a lot of small studios, probably a good amount of studios out here as well that are kind of more of a boutique shop that maybe produce series all on their own versus the giant studios. Sometimes they're contracted by Disney, for example, to make a series and put it out there. So we work with Oddbot Animation, Storybots Studios, Titmouse. These are all big animation names, but small companies in Los Angeles.
Yeah, so we thought that we would do a few things, that we would basically walk you guys through the animation process, since I'm not sure how many of you guys are privy to that, and it's a great thing if that ever comes across your plate. You'll sort of have a little bit of a background in it. And then we thought we would also talk a little bit about how we started the company, what we did to sort of focus things in a design-centric way, and how we made that happen. So starting out with the animation process, does anybody else work in animation other than this gentleman? Lucy does a little bit. You do a little bit? Okay. So we do, at Boombox, we do everything except for the production dialogue recording. We don't record any of that. But so as far as the process goes, as soon as a animation series gets greenlit, they'll start coming up with concepts and everything. Then they write the scripts. Then from scripts, they do the casting, and they'll record all of the dialogue in a booth. So it's all completely clean. It's all done in the booth. At that point in time, once all the characters for a particular episode have been recorded, they will assemble it into a radio play. And what that means is it is just a string of basically the script in audio format, as if you were listening to a book on tape, or like an old radio show. So it's all timed out properly so that it reads, but oftentimes it's not really timed to the length of the show because it doesn't have the action scenes, the fight scenes aren't in it. So for a 22-minute episode, it might end up being 11 minutes of dialogue if it's a high action show, or it might be 18 minutes if it's a preschool thing where they're just gonna walk around a little bit. It really depends. And usually we get those cues from the production team, and they let us know about that. So from there, once the radio play has been assembled, we give that back to the production studio and to their picture editorial team in the form of an AAF and usually either a .wav or an MP3 file. And they will do storyboards. So that's just like doing storyboards when you're directing live action. They will draw panels, and there's usually a panel every maybe half second or so that you can tell what the action is going to be. And that will cue the animation studio overseas how to animate it, basically. And they will time that with the radio play. So they will chop up the audio, again, in picture editorial to make it work with the timing that they get visually. At that point in time, that is exported and it's sent overseas and it is animated fully. That takes about 6 months or so to come back again. And then when we receive it, when the animation is returned, then it will come back to the picture editorial team. They will import it all and they will lock it. And at that point in time, we're in post-production. So all of that is production up until then. Once we get locked picture, then they will come to our studio. First they send the picture, and then they come to our studio and we will sit with either the executive producer or the supervising director, or sometimes both, and we'll have a spotting session. So we'll watch the material through, and in real time, or we often stop, they will tell us what they want for things. So they're not pointing out what's happening. I'm sure all of you guys do spotting sessions, but they're not pointing out what's happening. That's obvious. They don't need to say oh, that's Mickey Mouse and he's opening a door. They're pointing out what are the design moments, what are they looking for as far as the sound, if they want anything especially unusual, like maybe there are, because we work in animation, there's a lot of really crazy stuff that would be very expensive VFX if it were live action, but instead it's all over the place. So maybe there's a character who has a trident that has laser beams. They want it to sound like ice or something. There's a lot of those sort of design moments happening. So they cue us into all of that. And then at that point, we take it back to the team, and Jeff and I, as supervising sound editors, will distribute it. We have a separate dialogue editor, sound effects editor, Foley editor. And we will give them all the spotting notes. We'll also sit with them individually and tell them what the intentions are, as well as how we expect them to proceed, what sounds to use, what we're thinking. We look things up in the library together. They go off and do their thing for a week or two, or however long is budgeted for the show. They bring it back to us. We'll review it with our editor. And then once we've compiled everybody's work together, we'll do a preview session with the clients. Where again, we watch it through with all of our sound in place, and they'll call out things that they want to change. Maybe they want something redesigned, or they want timing changed, or there might be a retake, which is when they're going to redraw a certain, we call them scenes in animation, but a shot, you would call it in live action, and what that might look like. Maybe there are going to be additional VFX, which would be any water effects, things like that. Magic is often input later, especially in CG. And then once everything's approved, it goes to the mix stage, and the re-recording mixer combines all of our work with all of the work from the composer. And we do a pre-dub day, and then we have a second day where in the morning we work through on the stage just to see how it's translating, make sure it all works in 5.1 and in stereo coming through a TV. And then in the afternoon we have clients by, and we sit with them for about 4 hours, and we do a review, and at the end of that we print it and send it off. So that's the process. Does anybody have any questions about
What sort of
that?
length program does that normally have that time scale for?
22 minutes or 2 11s.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the typical length. So that process typically takes us about 2 weeks for editorial, start to finish. So we'll spot, and then a couple weeks later it's mixed. We just keep going and going.
Yeah, and a season for us is usually 13 or 26 22-minute episodes. And since we're on about a every other week schedule, 26 episodes is a year's worth of work for our crew. Anybody else have any questions?
When the original voices are recorded, are they always recorded individually?
Most of the time they are recorded individually and they never meet any of their counterparts. If they do, it might be, in the lounge grabbing a bottle of water between sessions. There are just a very few number of shows that will still want to do cast records where they have everybody there and they put gobos or baffles in between all of them and, blankets on top and everything. The issue with that is that there's always bleed, even in the best studio when that's your scenario. And when you have it baffled enough for it to sound good, then you're actually losing the fact that they can see each other. So it sort of defeats the purpose of them being in the same room because they're basically all in little tiny booths in the same room.
I'm just wondering about the timing. The scene could be done really quickly by the first person. And actually responses could be at a different speed. And is there any form of guide?
They will play the other actors' materials for them if there's a question of that. But a lot of times, and the casting director is in all of the sessions, as well as usually the, what do they call it? The head writer, I guess. And so they'll direct them as to how the other actors played it, but they'll also often read the lines at the pace that they'd like them to do it. They have something very particular in mind. And because we do usually 26 episodes per season, and things will go 2, 3, 4 seasons, they're really in character by the end of it. They know exactly the tempo that's expected of them. So they get extremely good at doing the work at the right speed.
We also have a situation where a lot of the actors, since it's a really cushy gig to be a voice actor, you can do it in your underwear if you really want to. They can get some really decent names to do main characters in a series because it's a really regular good gig. But some of these people will be traveling the world doing films and TV shows and things like that. So it's unrealistic for some of those situations to have them in the same room. So it's pretty typical that they'll do Source Connect records or they'll do records in foreign studios. And that's the only time that dialogue is ever troublesome for us, is if the studios don't match. So it comes back, and then when we're in the mix part of the process, we need to make sure that we take sometimes ADR that was recorded in Burbank and match it to their live records that were recorded in the Netherlands or wherever they happen to be shooting. Any other questions about the
Are you mixing and editing in 5.1?
Yes, we are. We're primarily in 5.1. A few Disney shows are still all stereo. And we've had a lot of interest specifically from Netflix to start working in Atmos. So they're pretty sure that everything's going to need to be in Atmos in the next 2 to 5 years. So we're probably going to be transitioning to that in the near future.
Did you say that you were doing some theatre work as well?
No theater work.
You don't do any theatre work?
No, we've done a few 4D experiences, and we've done a few 360 videos, but that's as multimedia as we get. We know our process down, and typically just do TV animation.
And we do also do interactive choose your own adventure type things where you choose on Netflix or whatever with the remote, how the characters should proceed. So we do those as well as far as multimedia things, but nothing theatrical.
Those are good and complicated.
You said that it's 2 weeks for one episode. How is that split up with the editing and the mixing and the different roles in the editing? How would say 2 weeks for one episode for the whole audio process? How does that split up?
It really depends on what the show requires sound-wise and also what the budget is, because our day counts do depend. But we don't have anybody who's staff and who's just there working on that one thing for 2 weeks. that would be extremely cushy. We have our sound effects editor is the one who spends the most amount of time, and we do between, I don't know, 4 and 9 days, maybe.
Pretty
10,
much.
10 days on that, depending on what's necessary.
If it's a 10-day show, we're probably going to have to put 2 editors on it just to get the turnaround done in time. But we usually staff it with the same 2 people all through the series, so they're just a team.
Yeah, and then we have Foley. We do all digital Foley, so it's all done with contact on a keyboard, and we have a Foley editor who does all that in 1 to 2 days, depending on the series and what it needs. And then our dialogue editor does 1 day, since it's not any EQing. There's very minimal cleanup since it's all recorded in a booth. It's just syncing with the animation, since it really depends how high quality it is, how many different mouth movements they have programmed into their animation, tightening all of that up, and then like clicks and pops and smaller things like that. But yeah, so usually most people work on more than 1 series when they work with us in order to be full-time because of that.
How much time spent on the voice record? Is it hard to?
I don't know about that because we don't record them in-house, and a lot of that has to do with actor availability rather than, getting them all in.
Most shows seem to have like a day that they dedicate every week to voice records. So I would say that might be the general pace, because they'll do ADR as well. So they'll do all the pickups they need for previous episodes as they're doing new episodes. So they set that time aside as I think most of my shows are about a day.
Yeah, and so in animation, I guess that brings up another point, is that we have 2, so there are the original production dialogue recordings, and then there are 2 other stages where they can record dialogue. There are pickups, which is when, like I said, they do the radio playwright, and then they do the animatic, which is those storyboard panels timed out to create a video. If at that point they feel like, oh, we really wish we would have gotten this line because this scene just doesn't make any sense without it, at that point, if they go back and record before it gets sent to animation, that's a pickup line because it's still during production. And then if it comes back and they decide to add a line, a lot of times we're not doing ADR to fix quality issues because it's all done in the booth. ADR is almost exclusively because they just decide to change what a character says, or something similar to that. They change the action and all of a sudden they're talking about a hill and the hill isn't there anymore. They will pick that up as ADR during the post-process.
Or if they don't want to pay to reanimate a scene and the mouth shapes are just completely wrong, they'll figure out a way to fit a new line in and re-record it, because it's way cheaper to do that.
All right.
So I want to talk a little bit about kind of our mission, so we can segue into that, and the other things we wanted to talk about today, which Emma kind of outlined a little bit for you. So when we started the company, like I mentioned, we came from a large studio environment, and we've heard from a lot of people that it is the case. It might not be the case where you work, but there's a lot of sort of a trade secret mentality when you're working in post, where it's almost like you have the secret sauce, and it's something that you might not want to necessarily share with other people. We were relatively young when we joined Warner Brothers, and we found that while everyone was extremely talented, it felt like everyone was a bit segmented and kind of kept to themselves. You go in your room, it's 4 walls, it has a door, it closes, you do your work, and then you call it a day. But we came from a boutique studio where we were all friends, and we all had lunch together, and when someone had something cool they were doing, they'd bring everybody in and say, come check out what I'm working on. And we'd say, that's awesome, or hey, do you have any suggestions? And we would give each other kind of this cool feedback loop where all the work got elevated because we were supporting each other versus in some sort of secret competition. So we wanted to start a company where communication was one of the main focuses. And the level of communication doesn't just stop with us and our internal team, but we could also share that with everybody all across the world. And that's the reason we're even here, is because we decided to share things and have kind of this open source mentality to sound design. So for us, it made a lot of sense to put the tools out there, knowing that what you bring to it is the creativity. Anybody can take a set of tools and learn them to the T, but that doesn't mean that you're going to be great at this job, because you have to bring your own creative spin to it. So we thought there's really no negative to putting out there everything that we know, both internally and externally. So that's a big part of our company mentality. We also just wanted a lot of team building within the company, to have that sort of supporting each other vibe. So we came up with the idea of lunch and learn, where once a month, everybody in the company gets together, we buy everybody lunch, and then we go to our mix stage, and in a rotation throughout the whole year, one person on the staff either learns something or talks about something that they consider themselves pretty good at or an expert on, and teaches it to the whole team. And from intern all the way up, we are all students, all the way through. And every time we do one of these, I think Kate would say the same, we learn something new, like constantly, which is super cool to hire someone straight out of college and then 2 months later have them sit down and teach you something. So having that attitude of everybody has something to give and everyone has something to learn really is one of our core values as a company, which is how we started the blog and put that out there for everybody else, is to start that back and forth, that communication. So that's how we built our entire internal vibe, and that's how we built our external vibe. So we're going to dig in a little bit more on that, but that's our basic kind of mission statement, was to break the mold a little bit and just be willing to share with everybody, knowing that people like you can take these tools or learn about animation and then run with it. And there's been very few cons, we can talk about that, but it's been almost all pros, which has been really fantastic. So we consider ourselves a design-centric studio. We had the question about how our day counts work out and how much time goes into things. It might not be an industry standard because we came up as sound editors, and we decided that the focus, at least in animation, would be to put a really large chunk of that budget towards design and editorial. So we came up with this process of digital Foley, which I can talk a little bit more about, which takes some of that money that's usually allocated to Foley and puts it into design instead. And Foley for us is actually a major design element, because you could have a robot walking in through and destroying a city, and if you have a sound editor hand-cutting footsteps, it could be very, very time-consuming. But what we can do is we can have our designers design those footsteps, plug them into Contact, which is a sampler we use by Native Instruments, and then walk those giant metal, hollow, crazy dumpster hit footsteps that we designed as part of the general sound design. We can also walk all of our Foley with the MIDI at the same time. So we record both. If we're working on a CG animated show, sometimes you get back what's called play blast, and you can't tell what the surfaces are at all. All of a sudden, what looked like pavement is grass when you get the renderings back.
Play blast is it's when none of the textures are there, and often the walk cycles aren't yet animated, so the characters will sometimes be gliding around. None of the visual effects are done. It's just the grayscale bones of the animation that's like mocked up for timing.
So in the case where we have the walk cycles, we'll walk it, and then if animation comes back with all the renderings and something's different, all we need to do is swap the patches from cement to grass, hit record, and you've taken hours of Foley walking stage fix time, and you fixed it in the span it takes to record down. So, which happens all the time. Or they reanimate a scene in 2D and things change.
And we're certainly not proselytizing cutting out Foley from everybody's budgets or anything, but for animation in particular, there's not as much need for, we basically only, when we were doing live Foley, we're recording footsteps. There's no need to add a cloth pass. There's no need to do a whole bunch of props, because those are just things that don't necessarily add to animation. You want it to all be crisp and snappy. Otherwise, it's just noise. And that noise is what makes live action stuff sound real when you have Foley. So it's just the two different mediums needing something different.
Yeah.
Is that Edward or Walker software that you use, or is it your own setup?
It's a combination.
You know, we bought Edward, and then we had already set ourselves up to do Contact in pretty much the same method, so we don't use Edward, but I have heard very good things about it.
Yeah, on occasion we've used it for specialty stuff, but mostly we have two ways that we work with Foley. We either have libraries that we purchase that we work with, which are fantastic. There's lots of great materials out there. But also, if we're starting a new series, sometimes we'll hire a stage and hire a walker, talking through with them the idea that these sounds are going to be used for the series, and we will pay a premium to have whatever we needed recorded for the series, and then we'll map everything out. So we get custom records for the series, but then we're able to use them and plug them in going forward.
And that's especially good because, like he said, we work with a lot of our material isn't humans. So you can see why it's not that beneficial to have, somebody walking in dress shoes or whatever. So like I work on the Lion Guard. So we have, which is a Lion King spin-off show. So it's African animals. So we hired Foley walkers to walk all of the different types of animals, and they're obviously specialists. They're creating something that we could never just do in a closet because they have an expertise. So they recorded impalas and zebras and lions and cubs and birds and all this stuff, knowing that we would need it. And we had them record all different gaits. So, when they're walking, you really need to walk it step by step, even though they're four-legged. When they're running faster, it's usually like a ba-dump, 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 right? And then if they're running, you get a triplet gait. So ba-da-dup, 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 right? So they did all of that, and we were able to map it with a trigger point on each of those gaits. So rather than needing to all of a sudden play triplets on the piano by somebody who might not be an expert pianist, we then mapped it accordingly, which just, again, took hours out of the process.
So yeah, not to spend too much time on digital Foley, but I do have one more story. You have a question about that, but I have one more story after
I
that.
guess it's the question that leads now is the whole velocity based. You can create patches in Contact that are really sort of quite deep in terms of the different velocities that you can the player on the piano keys is then able to.
We walk everything with velocity turned off.
Huh?
Because we turn the velocity off.
Oh, you do?
We walk
do.
them at a steady velocity, which gives the mixer all of the control to do volumes. Because if they started walking fades, you would be fighting that when you're going to mix it if you needed to turn something up.
Okay.
Yeah, so we actually walk everything at a single velocity.
Okay.
And one other story, which will segue us to creative design, is we did a Christmas movie called Albert. It's about Christmas trees and a cactus, and they wanted that. Basically, it's these plants that jump around in ceramic pots for 45 minutes. So what we did was we had a Foley stage record all these different size pots, drags, jumps, movement and stuff. But we took it to the next level, and this is where digital Foley really helps us out, is we actually did branch movement as well as quills for the cactus and shaking and things like that. And then we could map within the sampler each of those to go to their own tracks. He wears a bunch of jingle bells at some point because he's a Christmas tree bouncing around. Everything could have its own track mapped out, but be walked in one single pass. So there was no editorial afterwards to get all of that to line up. It sounded very natural and worked really well, but we still had complete control over the layers in the mix. So if the client says the jingle bells are great, but let's turn those down, we're not committed to a Foley walker with a ceramic pot, a branch, and bells on the stage. So just another example of something that was really cool and flexible by using digital Foley. But that's all design-based stuff. Those are the really eccentric, fun ways to use it. Like I said, we're really focused on the design side, and that's because animation gives you that opportunity. It's the ability to blow up worlds is a weekly issue that we constantly run into in new and exciting ways. Spaceships, aliens. We do a lot of creative vocal recording, which is not something that happens quite so much in animation by the sound editors. But our team will be outside being pirates fighting or being an alien cantina-style walla on a weekly basis because it's called upon us to do that sort of stuff. As long as it's not English, we can go crazy from a dialogue standpoint as well. Yeah,
so like I mentioned and like Jeff just said, we're very design-centric just because the material calls for it. If you think about it, the animation is drawn worlds, created by artists that are coming to life. So our series are all very out there concepts. No one's making animation anymore where kids are just in a school hanging out, opening and closing their lockers. I don't know if you guys have watched any animation recently, if any of you have kids. It is all human-like creatures talking to each other, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. You have these human-sized turtles who are having ninja battles, several per episode. There's always an opening battle and a closing battle, right? And then a little bit of something in between.
Sometimes the whole 11 is a battle. It happens.
Yeah. Lots and lots of vehicles that would never exist in real life. I work on a show called Amphibia, where they've been teleported into a world that's has frogs. And so every monster is some sort of bug or amphibious creature. And so several times per episode, we're coming up with what those vocals would sound like, what would their wing flaps be, all of that. So we wanted to talk a little bit about interesting client requests and how you sort of meet those expectations, because we often have people come in who maybe don't have the vernacular to talk about sound, or maybe they're thinking that they just want to be presented with something completely different than what they're used to. Or maybe a lot of times on pilots, people are really wanting to make their own stamp visually, but also then to add the sound that matches it. And so an example of that is I was working on a pilot a long time ago, well, a few years ago, and it was just really out there. It was a boy in a spaceship whose brother was a narwhal, and there was like, I don't know, a puking competition. There was a lot going on. But it was all this really gritty looking animation. It was sort of throwback to when we were kids, what it looked like in 2D. Everything was these oranges and greens and things like that. And so I took a look at it and I was thinking, okay, this needs to have, gritty, dirty space sound effects, because it was a space mission thing in a rocket ship. So I came into it thinking we're going to go Star Trek, door opens and closes, right? Like beam me up, Scotty kind of things. And instead, they really surprised me and they said, no, I want this to sound, this was about the time when the first iPhone first came out. They said, I want this to sound like an iPhone looks. And you have to, like, in that moment, pivot, like your entire thought process in your brain and go, first I was thinking, I don't know what that means. You're a crazy person, right? But then you go, well, so I was like, well, what do you mean? And they were like, well, I don't know. I want it to be like an iPhone. And he was so insistent. And so I had to stop myself and think about, what are the words that I would use to describe how did we go from how we felt about our cell phones when they were flip phones, right? And everybody had a Nokia or something. Or like a Motorola Razr phone. Did you guys have those? Yeah. And then all of a sudden the iPhone came out. And do you guys remember when there was like the big presentation and people were like losing their minds watching people swipe on the screen? And so you have to think, well, what did the iPhone say to the world, right? It was sleek. It was rounded corners, right? There was nothing sharp about it. There was nothing gritty about it. It was all soft. And it was streamlined, right? So to me, for sci-fi tech sounds, that immediately brings me into the mindset of the creator and saying, I know exactly what you want. You don't want 20 things layered on top of each other when there's a laser blast, right? You want one maybe synth sound that I made in a synthesizer on the iPad or something, right? And so you have to take those cues, and we're very fortunate to have clients who are always giving us outlandish requests that we have to decode, but at the same time, it brings our creativity up because we go for the unexpected then, and we bring those adjectives and that like thesaurus in our brain, right, to every spotting session. So that's sort of our specialty.
Yeah, and I'll get to you in one sec. I just wanted to expand on that a bit, which is, has anyone ever had a client reference a scene from a movie, and then you watch the scene and there's literally nothing to reference?
Like there's no sound?
There's like, the laser from this one moment is just, it's so perfect, and you pull it up on YouTube and there's nothing. There's
like a
happening.
French horn playing a note or something,
yeah,
and nothing else.
I just want the vibe of Poltergeist, and you're like, okay. So I wrote a blog post recently about like touchstones in sound design, which happens to us all the time, like certain movies that are just part of the vernacular that everyone needs to know. You need to know what the Jurassic Park T-Rex sounds like. You need to know what Star Wars sounds like, that sort of stuff. But oftentimes, when we were taking suggestions on this, so the way we did this as a blog post idea was to ask the company, I said, does anyone have any suggestions of what they think, bless you, pinnacle of sound design moments are? And even within our own company of editors, people were suggesting things that they get all the time that don't have any big moment to them. It's just a matter of the feeling that you get from it. So just like the iPhone idea, you have to put yourself in the mindset of
the visual filmmaker.
And
what did they get from that scene?
Yes, exactly. And not only that, did they watch it as a contemporary movie, or did they watch it when they were 12? Did it excite them because they were kids when they watched it? You have
Yeah.
to start really thinking deep about what this might call up in them, figure out what that feeling is, and then translate it to sound.
So it's all about the follow-up questions.
Yes, exactly. We do a lot of mind reading. We do a lot of like, let's have a discussion about this. The worst thing you can do is say, got it, and then go, I don't know what they're talking about. I guess I'll just write down, make it feel like Predator, and not know exactly what that
Yeah, and then
means.
our editors have no idea.
And
what
then
they're
our
talking about.
editors, you know, exactly, they're kind of clueless in those moments. So we try to make a point of always having a discussion about those sorts of things. And we also find that I don't know if you find this too, show of hands, does anyone ever feel like a therapist when they're working with clients?
Yeah, everybody.
If you work enough in the industry, sometimes they just put their feet up and all they want to do is talk about the day they had because they're in a nice, quiet room and no one that they normally work with is there.
It's like a padded cell.
It's exactly, and we always say, this is a safe space. Please take your time. So putting the clients in a comfortable place before you even start the sound work, extremely important. So a lot of what we do is people skills too. Kind of a non sequitur, but good opportunity to bring it up.
Yeah.
So we wanted to talk a bit about diversity, right?
Yeah, we did, because Emma had brought it up as something that's important, and it's something that's extremely important to us. Before we started the company, I'm sure out here as well, there aren't a lot of women, at least in the States, who are working, and there's also not a lot of diversity in general. It's up until now you can get, at least in the US, a university degree in sound design for film specifically, or in the recording arts, but for a certain amount of time it was a trade skill, and it was something that you came up as a apprentice under somebody else, and then you began doing it, which is also a wonderful way to do it. But unfortunately, it was extremely one-sided in who was coming up in that trade. So you have a lot of
It's a boys' club.
55-year-old men, I would say, like when we worked in the studios. And that's just a matter of who came up at a certain time. But we wanted to create a different kind of environment, one where everybody was extremely comfortable, one where everybody felt equally valued. And we also felt like the more voices you have, the better the work, honestly. And the more diversity you have, also the better the creativity. And we see it every day. We have about 50-50 men and women. We try really hard to maintain that. And we don't do it by hiring women who are less qualified. We do it by, and this was actually very surprising because when we were at the studio, it was said to me a few times, well, there aren't any other women because no one's qualified. They're not applying for the jobs. And I took that as the truth. That made perfect sense to me. There weren't a lot of women in school when I was in school either. But the interesting thing is that when we started the company, there were a lot of female candidates. The problem is that they're all female candidates for the very lowest level of jobs. They don't have the experience yet. So we said, let's try our hardest to have equal number of interviewees who are men and women, and then we'll always give it to the best candidate, no matter what, right? So we're just opening up the playing field. And at that level, like intern level and entry level positions, so straight out of college positions, there's really no difference in experience, and so we're not favoring like bringing in interviewees, women who are less experienced. No one has any experience, right? But we've actually found that we hire extremely well, female-wise. We also have a number of different ethnicities. We have all different religions. We have a few transgender employees. So we really kind of run the gamut, and I think that that's a combination of, honestly, I would say that it's greatly that they come to us because they feel comfortable. Too, we have a lot of applicants. But in terms of creativity, when you have people from all those different backgrounds in the same team, their thought process is different, right? They're coming to you with different experiences in life. And so, like we talked about being design-centric and having to pull from the movies that you've watched, or maybe the places that you've traveled around the world, or the neighborhood that you lived in, and what did it sound like? If you have a 1-second shot of a factory building, and the whole point of that shot is to establish that we're in a bad neighborhood, everybody's gonna bring a different memory from their childhood, right, of what that should sound like. Everybody's gonna go, well, there should be a Doberman there, or maybe there should be an industrial train, because when I was, a kid and I was in a bad neighborhood, that's what it sounded like in Racine, Wisconsin, right? So it's really important to have those different life experiences, those different communication skills that they bring in order to have a well-rounded team where when we're brainstorming, we get so many more ideas than when it was a truly homogenous group. So that, honestly, we thought it was something that we were gonna have to struggle to do when we set out, and Jeff was 100% on board for that. But in reality, fortunately, it was extremely easy. And it's sort of become a mission of ours to continue to do that with the company, but also to try and encourage other people to rethink that, not just people who are in charge of their studio's hiring practices, but even if you're at an entry-level position yourself, or you have the opportunity to recommend someone, or maybe if there's an intern who seems to be struggling and you want to say like, hey, why don't you come and sit in my room and watch me communicate with a client or something, just to give all those equal opportunities to everybody. It bears great fruits for everybody involved.
Exactly. We reached 50-50 gender-wise probably about 6 months ago. We're actually at about 65% female now. So we're a majority female company, which I think is probably safe to say is extremely unusual in our industry, but has been extremely beneficial for us.
And it honestly, it feels, there's some women here, but I forgot what a burden it was to hold to always be the only woman. And I know that that is also true of being the only one of an ethnicity or the only one of a certain religion, where you just, you wear that with you and you bear it, and you don't realize that it's bothering you until finally, you know, you're all in the room with 50-50 and you feel at home again. And so it's important for us that everybody feels at home. Honestly, I get surprised every time now when we go to awards shows and I see show after show after show and, you know, award after award being accepted by basically all men. And I love that it surprises me now, because, you know, 10 years ago, I wouldn't have thought anything of it. So,
yeah,
something to touch on.
And that can segue us a little bit into our internship program. Since Emma brought it up, I'd be happy to kind of talk you guys through what that is too, which has been extremely helpful for us on the hiring side. So we always make a point, as much as we can, if we have the candidates, to hire an intern that's male and an intern that's female, because that is largely a part of our candidate pool for hiring within our work environment. So obviously if the hiring pool is 50-50, then we have a great chance of hiring both men and women equally. And
it's not that, and our internship program is not like a segue into a job. It's just that if you get to know somebody after 3 months of seeing them work diligently and they seem to really meld well with the team, there's a good chance then that we'll think of them first when a position does come up in the future. And that could be, you know, a few days, it could be a few years, it really depends. But those people who've worked hard and given a lot of their time to us as a company, we do try to keep them in mind.
They're the ones we build relationships with.
Yeah.
So that's another thing. When we started the company, we couldn't have interns at Warner Brothers, and we were always like, wouldn't it be great if we had someone to do this, that, or the other? And it's not take out the trash or things like that. We wanted to have people as part of the creative process with us. We wanted to have an opportunity to teach. And Kate and I both came from teaching backgrounds since we were very young. We love sharing information, as we've talked about a bunch. So our internship program, which has been really successful for us, is we interview every quarter, or every it's trimester system, so we have a 4-month internship, and we bring on interns that have all levels of experience, but with the idea that they're going to come in and basically get a graduate degree in post-sound, specifically for animation, because when people ask us for work all the time, advice, how do I get a job in the industry, how do I get my foot in the door, things like that, the truth of the matter is that you can go to school and you can get a degree, but as all of you as working professionals probably know, you really need to be in an environment around working professionals. You have to see that happen on a day-to-day basis, at least to some capacity, to understand the demands of the job. Because school is fantastic, but not necessarily super deadline driven, and the real world is rough, and you need to have an experience with that. So what we do is we bring on 2 interns, they alternate days, and then we built a program which, to be perfectly honest, warts and all, was not great when we started it, and we learned as we went on to focus in on it. But it's actually a program where someone in our office, again with the teaching sharing aspect, is an expert on a certain job. So you have Carol, who does our digital Foley, or you have our dialogue editor, and every week we take materials from old shows, stuff that's never gonna, it's aired ancient, long time ago, very short versions of what we do on a professional basis. So if it's dialogue, they get all the dialogue materials for, say, a 3-minute clip. They sit down with this editor who's part of the team, get a lesson on how to do the job, take it away, work on it for a week, bring it back, show it to them, and then get actual feedback on the job. And we do that with dialogue editing, we do it with Foley, we do sound design, mix, sound editing, all across every aspect of what the job could entail. So when they leave our program, they basically have an idea not only of what job they would really love to do, because as you know, everyone has different functions in this post world, but they actually know what they maybe don't want to do and where they don't want to be headed and what to focus on.
And then at the end, we also have them put all those skills together by Jeff and I do mock client interaction. So they pick a video, it can be whatever they want, that's like 30 seconds long usually, since animation tends to be very design heavy. And they don't have to do animation, they can do horror, they can do games, whatever. And we do a spot and they go off for a week and then they come back with a finished product and we do a preview, and we are extremely tough on them. And we tell them that we are going to have real world criticisms, we're going to hold them to professional standards. And they use all those skills that they learned during their individual lessons and they put them all together to do those, and then hopefully walk away from our program with demo reel pieces that they can use to show their skills.
Yeah, so just a little bit more of how we kind of share. And we feel very confident when those people go out into the world that they're actually quite hireable.
Yeah, and at first, too, you know, we had the feeling, speaking to the sort of the old mentality, like what if we train these people and then they go out, and animation is a fairly small industry, and then they just work for our competitors. And so we're basically staffing our competitors with people who know our exact workflow and know the best ways to do things in our mind. And we just decided, like,
we don't care.
So what? Right? Like, we lifted the entire industry up if we do that. If we teach people better, if we have people who aren't, you know, like cramming before every deadline because they have horrible workflow or they don't know how things are done professionally, or they're at home freelancing and nobody has talked them through like how to lay out their work or what their design process should be. Does it bother us that we're making people's lives easier, that we're giving them a better professional experience, whether they're working for us or our competitor? No. There's plenty of work to go around. We're all up for the same awards. We're happy if an ex-intern of ours at some point wins an Emmy over us. You know, that would be a win for us as well. So we've just sort of put our egos aside and said, like, how do we make this industry even better? Animation is something that is usually the lowest rung, right? You have like features, then you have like live action TV dramas, and then you have like comedies, and then like animation's like way down here, right? When we were at Warner Brothers. And we just said, how can we bring it up? How can we start getting the best people wanting to do animation? How can we get it onto sort of the internet and the world stage and things like this, doing talks and bringing our knowledge to other people and saying, like, we're all in this together. We're all designing cool stuff. We're all, you know, making dragon vocals and, you know, ninja sword fights and whatever. We're coming, and even if you're not, if you're doing a rom-com every single day, you're coming to work, you're doing your best work, and you're using technology and the skills that you learn to do it, and we're all in it together.
And to be honest, the industry right now is completely exploding. There's so much work to be had in animation in Los Angeles. There's plenty of work going on here. We were just in Dublin. Studios are exploding with work. There's a lot of TV being made with all the streaming services right now. So we like to try to be zen about hearing if a competition has gotten a series that we wanted. Great. We'll probably get the next one. It's worked out really well for us to have that sort of attitude, and it's a lot better for our mental stability too, to not have jealousy in those sorts of situations. But soup to nuts, all those jobs in our company, we're a company of 20 max. We have people working out of this tiny office, sharing rooms. We have freelancers working from home, but we're doing about 12 series right now. So
Yeah.
it's worked out pretty well for us to just go with the flow and help and share as much as we can. There's been very little negatives, but as far as the negatives go, it's pretty much just like internet feedback, which we welcome. Sometimes we'll write articles about stuff that we feel like we know about and just want to share, but we're not experts on everything. And we sometimes get a comment back that isn't necessarily kind. And if that's the cost of putting all this information out there, it's very easy for us to just say, either respond politely, thank you for your feedback, or not engage if it's a negative sort of road to go down. But generally, the feedback's been extremely positive from all the sharing we've done.
Yeah, and our philosophy has always been, you know, that we're lifelong learners. We're always learning. We're always happy to be learning and teaching. we're in the middle of a process. You know, we're not like sitting up here at the top being experts at absolutely everything, but there's always going to be somebody under you, right, who hasn't learned the same things that you've learned, and there are always going to be people above you who are more of an expert. And so it doesn't bother either of us that there are people on the internet who are more of experts in the things that we talk about, and we're doing it for the people maybe who are under us, who are learning. And Jeff and I didn't have anybody who was really teaching us soup to nuts how to do any of this. We came upon all of our knowledge and all of our workflow through trial and error. And so if we can help somebody by speeding up that process so it takes, 2 years instead of 15 years, we're happy to do that.
Yeah, a good example of that would be we were contracted by Nickelodeon to do the 360 video. And it's all locked down, but you're turning the phone that you're watching, or you're pulling a mouse on a screen, and you're hearing the sound that's basically surrounding you. And the first thing I did was say, yes, we can do that. And then I went on Google and Googled, how do you do this? To try to figure out what was going on. I understood the concept of it, but there was nothing. I mean, I couldn't find anything. And maybe I'm a terrible Googler, or maybe things have changed, but this was probably 4 or 5 years ago. So there just wasn't a lot going on with it. And the first thing I thought after I finished the project and it was a success was, this is a great blog post because it just should be out there. I have no idea if the way I did it is correct, but it was easy enough for me to put together that I feel like it could scale for anybody else. What I ended up doing was pretty simple. I asked them to just divide it into segments visually on the screen, and then I built a busing system where all the sounds were bussed to dialogue, music, and effects based on what was happening on screen. And if it was score, I just had those go to a straight stereo score stem. So it seemed basic enough. Then I wrote a blog post about it, and now that's out there, so the next person that needs to do this at least can look at it and go, maybe this is a great baseline, now I'm going to figure out how to make it even better. And I would love it if that person would then write a blog post about how I improved Jeff's method of doing the 360 video, so then I could get better at it as well.
Yeah. So I think we should open up for questions.
I think so.
Right?
It's been about an hour, so it's
Yeah.
perfect. Okay, great. I know there was a question in the middle that we didn't get to. I've kept you in mind. Yeah, you got to be on mic.
My chair is to the side.
Firstly, it's been really great to hear you guys chat about your workflow and your approach to your company. I think it's really refreshing.
Thank you.
That you have such a positive attitude and you're really humble. It's nice that you kind of take that approach where you're happy to learn from people who are sort of under you kind of thing. It's just nice to hear that. So my question was, I had 2 questions, if that's okay.
Sure.
Firstly, so I'm interested about the creative aspect because you mentioned, it sounds like you have lots of time to experiment. So I'm interested in how, if you do have, at the start of each job, do you kind of have a week or a few days to kind of really experiment, or do you find that you are, your deadlines are tight, therefore you do have to just go to your kind of usual techniques and, get the job done? And secondly, I'm interested in how running a company, managing a team, has that affected your creative process in any way? And as the bosses, are you kind of finding that you have to manage the team also and not actually do the work? So it's sort of that balance really between being a boss and being creative.
Which one do you want to take? We're 50-50 partners. We got to split them up.
I'll take the first one.
You took the easy one.
Do you want to do the...
No, I'm kidding. I'm just messing.
You can take that one.
I would have said that either way. I'm just messing around.
I'm sorry. So, but will you remind me again what the first one was?
Creatively, do we put extra time into design?
Yeah. So no, yes, our deadlines are extremely tight. It sounds like we have a lot of time, but our shows are very, very heavy, especially on the sound effects side. We usually cut about somewhere between 2 and 5 minutes in a day, which is a lot if you're doing sort of a Transformers type robot battle, right? Where every, I would say 2 seconds, there's a new shot of a new character like transforming and zipping in as a jet and like running across planets, and it can be absolutely insane. And so we work at an extremely fast clip at all times. Pretty much everybody has to be extremely efficient in Pro Tools. That's just a non-starter if they're not. But a lot of our sort of ethos were born out of that, because when we worked previously, we were just always feeling like we were so behind that we didn't have the time to record our own things or to figure out how to use a synthesizer, right? Or like maybe there's a new plugin that you've had that you bought forever ago, but like you just feel like you can't stop working. I think I would drink like 3 cups of coffee and then like not get up and go to the bathroom for like 6 hours while I just furiously like typed so fast that my fingers got numb. So I think that out of that, we sort of said, well, take a step back. If we can't change the deadlines and we can't change the budgets, right? How can we have an environment where we do have time to record things, where we do have time to learn new software? Because that's how we bring our work up. So that's where really the Lunch and Learns came in, was that we said, well, what if not everybody needs to go back into their cave of a room and figure everything out individually and spend all that time? What if instead one person gets tasked with learning a new piece of software that we bought for the studio, and then they just tell everybody while we eat lunch for an hour, because we all have time to eat lunch, right? And so that's really what that is. You know, we all read the blog because we have different people at our company write blog posts about things that they've figured out how to do, or maybe something that they learned in college that they feel like maybe the rest of us don't know. And then we read it, and you know, you have a sandwich and read a blog post, and it's not that daunting of a task. We also have our interns regularly record for us. So we have a running list of recordings that we would like to have happen for the show, or for whatever show people are working on. And then each week they go out and they buy like, you know, minimally priced items, and they record them, and then our editors will process them and edit them and integrate them into our library and use them for the series. But that makes it a little bit less daunting, because it's really hard to take your editor brain out of editor mode, pick up a microphone, get into recording mode, get all the cables sorted out, you know, and then come back to your chair. It's like you've lost hours in your day, which is really just time that we don't have as editors, but we wanted to still be part of that process, part of that creativity. So our editors a lot of time are directing the interns. Sometimes it gets prepped by the interns and they step out of their room, and the editor will help with the process of the actual recording. So yeah, I don't want to give the impression that somehow we have all this time to be super creative. The issue is we don't have the time, and how do we do it anyway? Because a lot of times too, we're working, you know, 9, 10, 11, 12-hour days as it is, and working furiously to get the work done at the caliber that we expect.
We also have a very deep shared library amongst the entire studio that consists of these recordings or of things that have been designed in the past. So every single day, that library is growing because everyone is contributing to it. So if you work on a show and you design something cool, we have a labeling system for it. You label it, it goes in the library, and everyone is working with elements that someone created as a boombox element.
And it's so good because then everybody's talking about it too at lunch. You're going, oh, have you guys checked out Brielle's like awesome rock smashes?
You wouldn't think this would happen, but it does.
Yeah, we're all like nerds.
We're nerds, yeah.
So, but yeah, and it becomes something that everybody's really proud of. Nobody is jealous that somebody else is using their sounds or cutting corners or whatever, because we're all just then building upon it. And maybe some awesome sound that somebody made for an explosion then gets used as a design element in something else, in a cannon blast or whatever, and then that also gets saved into the library. So we're all working with each other's work and expanding further.
And yeah, to answer your other question, so Kate and I each started with one series. That's how we started the company. And we did editorial, we supervised, we had mixers that we hired to mix, or in the case of the Disney shows, Disney mixes most of their shows. And then very quickly, we couldn't edit anymore. When you're running a company and building, the bigger we got, the more we supervised. So our solution, which was pretty elegant for us, was to dip in more into re-recording mixing, because we are the gatekeepers of everything as the mixer. At the very end, we can put our editor hat on. We can put our supervisor hat on. Even if we have someone else in the company as a lead editor and we haven't seen the materials until they're on the stage, we can take the time to work with the editorial if the mix is moving quick enough and put our stamp on things. So we found that it's been extremely valuable for us to really push ourselves into that role more, which is a time-consuming role, but it's not only the creative side, but it's also the client side. So we're spending time getting the face-to-face with our clients, and we also get to see exactly what everyone's up to, because we're actually working with their materials every day. We do oversee all of the editorial of the shows we supervise. Kate and I do a full pass, sometimes up to 3, 4, 5 hours of our own spin on their editorial. We'll watch it down, and
once we put everything together and assemble all the different editors' work,
before
we really
it goes
dig
to the
in.
client. Yeah. So we do that. We do a little sweetening pass, that sort of thing. It kind of scratches that itch a little bit. Sometimes if something really cool comes up, we're like, we don't want to take anything away, but we know you're swamped. I'll do that, robot. Like, I'll just I need a moment. I got to exercise that part of my brain. So that's a way that we do that. And also, I like to cut all main title sequences. Super selfish reason, it's in every episode. So it's sort of fun for me to say, it's always on top of an episode's timeline. It's always a one-time thing. So we'll take those materials, cut it ourselves, so that the editor doesn't have an extra 30 or 60 seconds that week to cut. And then it just lives on forever. So that's sort of how we dip our hands in and run the company at the same time. Were there challenges, which I think was one part of your question, to like building the company, and are we set in our ways, or is it changing? It's changing daily. I mean, we make mistakes constantly, and we're just figuring out the best way to do things. We are extremely nerdy about taking notes and making processes for everything.
We're big planners too. We're planning years in advance. We're strategizing. We have weekly meetings, he and I, to talk about what's going on that week, and not like in a sort of tattling on the employees thing, but like strategizing how to move forward, how to build the business, how to do the best job possible on the work that we have, how to improve the workflow. We're always changing things. And honestly, we have our hands in probably like way more than we should. We're not the type of owners who like swoop in, yell at 2 people, then swoop back out again.
That would be really nice.
Yeah, that sounds pretty good.
I mean, not for the editors, but it'd be great for us.
No, but we're there, every day in the trenches doing the work and also trying to run the business. So.
And it's just all trial and error. I mean, it's as simple as when we had 3 or 4 people, hiring them on, setting them up with Slack and server access, and getting their paperwork to our director of finance, and getting all those sorts of things was easy because it was like once or twice a year. Now we're hiring people constantly. And so after we did it recently, like 2 or 3 times, forgetting and them going like, I can't get on the server, or this isn't working for me. We just said, let's just line it all up in a document, and then the next time we do it, we'll go ABC down the line and we'll set people up. So we do that kind of stuff all the time, and it just saves us so much work.
Yeah, we don't live in a world where we like to be frantic at the last minute. Some people thrive on that. We're years in advance planners. That's who we are. So who else has a question?
I was just curious because of the genre of animation. Do you find yourselves locking the sound design way before the mix, or is it all very fluid up until the final mix?
We tend to, as far as the process goes, we tend to do very minimal pre-design unless a show has the budget for it. So we're basically, those first 5 episodes, we're killing ourselves to like basically find the sound of the show. We don't render the kinds of stuff we talked about, librarying sounds and things like that, until we're well past 2, 3, 4 mixes and we know that's us past muster. But once we get to that preview session that Kate was talking about with clients, we are really nailed down. We don't want to be on the mix stage and then go, I really don't love the sound of this monster. We preview in person so that we can have a discussion, so that when we do those fixes and they ask for things to change, we can get it right for the stage, because there really is no time in animation to rework things even more on the mix stage.
And we're soloing elements. We're saying, you don't like this, why don't you like it? Listen to all these design elements. Are there any of these that speak to you, so that when we do redesign, that we know that we get it right? I can't think of it's been years since I've been on the stage and we've redesigned anything. We do cut things in, but we're cutting in like, hey, what if these footsteps had bigger splashes, or something like that. It'll be like pulling one key element from the library. We don't rethink. But that's because we put the time and the effort in and the communication with the clients early on, so that we don't have those things come up.
The notes that do come up are usually because they expected music to cover something and it's not working. Things like that. So we can get through mixes pretty quickly. I mean, sometimes we'll do 1 straight client pass of notes and we call it a day, which is great. Other shows are not like that. You had a question?
Yeah.
I was wondering how you sort of split up the effects side, if you had a person doing more sort of regular sort of effects editing and backgrounds and someone else doing straight design, or if it's one person doing robots, another person doing guns, or if it's just totally project dependent and you decide then there and then. I have another question as well, but one at a time is probably easier.
I'll take that one. You can take whatever the next question is. Mystery question. So generally what we do, because we find it really hard to reassemble work when you piecemeal it. All right, this is the robot person, and this is the, generally what we do is we just, if we're chopping a show, if it's a team of 2 editors, for example, we will find a very fair split. Like, I personally do it down to the second because I just don't want to get that call from the editors wondering why their section's a little bit longer this week. That's a little bit of mix of action and a little bit of mix of light things so that we know that their week is going to be manageable. And they just cut that section. Sometimes it literally means going through and finding the B stories, and we'll chunk it out and send it off to the editors. We have a shorthand of how to communicate that, so it's not terribly time consuming for Kate and I. We do have our assistant editors cut backgrounds and ambiances.
That's a newer thing that we just started
We just started that recently, which has been really great because our assistant editors are now credited on the show as a sound editor. They're available for awards. They were already working their tails off to do all kinds of stuff for Kate and I. Now they're starting to dip their toes into the actual creative side of things. So it's more of a linear flow versus piecemeal. When we came up, I had worked on some shows where you just do this monster, and sometimes when you put it all together, you just find there's holes. It's just hard to figure out.
Yeah, there's always something missing.
And then it falls on us as the supervisors to fill in the blanks.
No, I like working that way as well, so you can hear everything together.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and you as the editor, we do a lot of pre-mixing with clip gain when we're editing so that everything plays like it should for the clients. A lot of our editors do pre-panning because they just want to hear it in its final form. Yeah, which is what we prefer.
And the other greedy question was on interactive shows, like I think there's one called Puss in Boots on Netflix at the moment.
Yeah, that's...
Is that one of yours?
It's not.
No.
No, that was like one of the proto-interactives.
Yeah, one of the first.
We're working with DreamWorks, we're doing a DreamWorks one right now. Cool. Same company.
But I'm kind of curious as to how you schedule something, at the sort of pre-production stage, if you don't know how many various scenarios and things there are going to be. So it's not like a certain 22 minutes duration time if there's these other options and things to choose. How do you sort of plan interactive projects like that?
There will still be a total runtime of all materials. So even if as the viewer, you can choose your own adventure and you don't know how long your experience is going to be because it depends on the options chosen, there's still a certain amount of material that needs to be designed, right? A certain amount of footage. So we do our bidding process based on that. And so usually it's the equivalent of, they'll usually make it so it's the equivalent of a certain number of episodes, honestly, for contractual reasons, because they pay for their animation in total runtime as well. So yeah, it's usually pretty easy, but it is outside of our normal episodic budget. So if we have a television series that is also doing an interactive special, we will have like a different budget conversation, and then from there we will schedule accordingly.
So they know the duration with all the extras.
They do. So they'll say like this interactive total runtime will be 66 minutes. That's like basically 3 episodes worth of material, and then we'll go from there.
Good question.
Yeah. Anybody else?
No one
You
in
guys
the
are
back?
easy. Everyone's tired. It's been a long day.
It's warm in here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you guys for braving
Yeah.
this heat with us. Apparently this is a London heat wave, so it's very exciting for us. We brought the heat with us, I guess, from Los Angeles.